We're live. Hi, Magnus. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thank you, Grace. Great to be here. Big fan.
So to start the show, I would love to chat a little bit more about where you're coming from and how you got to where you are. So I think one of the most interesting experience you had before creating Antler, you created a global fashion group. Can you chat a little bit more about what were some lessons that you've learned during that era of your career that kind of like shape you into thinking about Antler and the fund?
Yeah, so we were building a company called ZALORA.com, which is the biggest fashion e-commerce business in Southeast Asia. So we operated across Vietnam, Philippines, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Brunei, and Singapore. This is about 600 million people in one of the fastest growing parts of the world. But obviously at the time where e-commerce was really just getting started here. So we had to build out a lot of that infrastructure. So we built out a logistics network, a way to pay, payment system in a way, but quite rudimentary, and lots of other things to be able to deliver a Amazon.com like user experience. So what ended up happening is, as we were building this company, a lot of the people who were part of that journey became the experts in the region on multiple great areas, right? So a lot of the really top companies that have been built subsequent to ZALORA in the region have been built by people who were part of building up ZALORA. So, for example, the founders of Gojek, Nadim and Kevin, the founders of Shopee. Gojek is kind of the Uber, but it's a super app of Indonesia. Well, it's across Southeast Asia. Shopee is the largest e-commerce platform here, which also expanded into South America. These are all kind of $10 billion plus companies. Shopee, Stashaway, Local, Aura. Probably a lot of people listening to this haven't heard about these companies, but they're really great companies in the region, are ex-ZALORA people. And we got very excited about supporting amazing founders from day zero and building great companies who had been part of building something great before, or coming out of areas or locations where they really have a great background, where they can solve an important problem, or really have shown that they can execute. And that became the genesis of Antler, is really working with amazing founders and building companies from scratch in developed and emerging ecosystems all across the globe. And we set up here in Southeast Asia and started doing it here, and now we're in 27 locations globally. And we had the pleasure to work with some really amazing founders in building great companies. And ultimately, there are two things that we try to be really good at. One is finding exceptional people and backing them from day zero. So really from pre-incorporation, with capital and access to co-founders and iterating on business ideas and access to a great network of people. And then we invest, and subsequent to that, we really are all about kind of supporting really early stage companies grow and scale as quickly as possible, with access to our network globally.
I wonder, okay, so I have like one more question before we can jump into like full Antler building. So you've worked at like heard of Rocket Internet, and I feel like it sounds like it was like the YC of like Europe or something. Like, can you like unpack that experience a little bit on like, what was it like working there? I could be completely wrong. I feel like I've heard of like Rocket Internet from like past guests and people.
Yeah. So basically, Rocket Internet is a European investor that have been part of funding and supporting to build and incubate some of the biggest e-commerce companies and marketplace companies all across the globe outside of the US, and done that rather successfully. They basically backed great people in building new companies from scratch, but they also had, I think, a tremendous infrastructure when it comes to supporting on tech and supporting on early operations, KPIs and tracking and so on. Now, I didn't spend much time there. What ended up happening is basically Rocket Internet and a family office out of Sweden called Kinnevik was the biggest investors into ZALORA, the company that we built. So, but a lot of my friends have been part of that. I think some great companies have been built. Some did less well. And then what is true, however, is a lot of the people who've been part of that journey have gone on to build really, really incredible companies all across the globe. So it's a really good alumni network of people who have worked really hard on building really great companies all across the globe. And some of them has turned out exceptionally. Some didn't work so well. And but what is true is a lot of them, subsequent to having built whatever they built, have gone on to build really, really, truly amazing companies all across the globe, from South America to the US to Europe to Africa to Asia. So it's a great kind of network of people who are excited about building and excited about executing. And we also been lucky through Antler to support a lot of people out of that network. So I think they really helped kind of spurn a lot of ecosystems across the globe.
I have okay, so I want to talk about building a global VC firm, or slash building a global company in the past. Like when you were doing the global fashion group or ZALORA, I guess when you first started, so I assume so I wonder how did you even build the connections in Asia, because it seems like you didn't really have direct family tie there, and I feel like it's really interesting that you started a global business. I wonder what was it like first kind of building the relationship in a different geolocation, and how did you kind of turn that into a profitable business? What were, I guess, 3 stages that you would identify as your building phase as a founder, that kind of translate into building Antler today?
Well, so I think life is a journey, right? And there are many things through your life that prepares you to do what you're going to do later. And I think, one thing I always thought was a great way to think about things is that you might not be able straight away to do what you're incredibly passionate about, because you need to learn something, experience something, and create great networks before you can do that. And I grew up on a farm in Norway, and was lucky to read a newspaper article as I was lighting the fireplace with that newspaper about this international school in the UK called United World Colleges. So if you haven't heard about it, it's an international organization which is focused on bringing people together from all across the globe, and they have a scholarship program. So if you don't have the money to pay, you can apply to scholarship, and so it's a combination of people who come from backgrounds like mine, who require a scholarship, but also people who grew up in very poor conditions in Africa or India or anywhere in the world, who are just passionate about having an impact and passionate about meeting people from other places across the globe. And then they'll send 2 to 8 people from each of these countries to a boarding school to do your 2 last years of high school. And the one I went to is called Atlantic College, which is in this old castle on the cliffs in Wales, in a place called St. Donald's Castle. And we were there with people from 82 nations, so from all across the globe, from both sides of conflicts. You have Palestinians, you had Israelis, you had people from, at the time there was a crisis in Kosovo, we had people from Albania, and we had people from Serbia. You had people from very developed markets and people from poor markets. You had very rich people, you had very poor people. So it was just a tremendous opportunity to see the potential of the world and meet people from all type of cultural backgrounds, which, for anyone who's been there, was a very transformative time, right? We were people from 82 nations, from ages of 16 to 19, living together for 2 years, studying. You learn a lot about each other. And I think that was always very inspirational in terms of having an impact on the world. And And then my family also, obviously, I come from Norway, and my parents, and as far as we kind of know, and I also did the genome test, I'm like 100% Norwegian, but my family has kind of been living all across the globe, building railways in South America and building up mines in Svalbard and various places. And so I think from an early age, I always thought experiencing new cultures and meeting new people was very interesting. And then on top of that, having a positive impact on the world. So, what we were doing with ZALORA always appealed to me, right? It was literally we were building something from new across a lot of different markets. Obviously not a new business idea, but we were breaking new ground in terms of how to deliver that and launch that across these markets. And we hired thousands of people in a short period of time, and we had to overcome pretty big challenges. The first challenge was really, I think, about securing supply. Like when you build a fashion company, a lot of fashion brands are quite prickly about where they want to sell, and basically it was hard to acquire the very best brands in the beginning. So that's something we had to overcome, and I think that was done through having great people in the team who hustled, and we have a lot of great stories from that. The second big challenge was the infrastructure, right? If you go to Indonesia at the time, only 2 or 3% of the population had bank cards, and the primary way to pay online, well, now there's QR codes and all types of stuff, but at the time was paying with a bank card. And if you don't have a bank card, then how do you pay, right? And we had a system called bank transfer, where you literally had to get a code, and you could go somewhere and pay in cash in your bank, get another code, and then go back to your computer and finish your transaction. So it was a high cancellation rate and not such a great customer experience of that way to check out of a cart. Logistics as well. A lot of the logistics companies were great, but not set up to deliver thousands or hundreds of thousands, or now with e-commerce, millions of packages per day, right, to any single person in a country with 270 million people like in Indonesia. So what was surprising as we were building this company, sure, I think the cultural part was important, and Southeast Asia can't be treated as one region. Like every single country has different religions, different cultures, different regulation, different GDP per capita, and so on. So that was always important. But I think what was also important is we had to build a lot of infrastructure that we, didn't, I guess, think as much about when we got started. Because an e-commerce company, if you launch an e-commerce company in Europe, or you launch an e-commerce company in the US, you can kind of tap into all this infrastructure. When that's said, when you then, so that, I guess that was kind of phase one. And then phase two is when you sorted out a lot of these problems, right? And then you have a real competitive edge, because you can deliver a customer experience that nobody else can. And that's when we saw hyper growth, and it's a lot about kind of managing that growth. And then there's a phase three where you're driving the company towards profitability. And in our case, we got acquired by Global Fashion Group, and I continued working there for a couple of years to prepare the IPO of that company, which was then a lot of focused on profitability, shifting the whole business from e-commerce to marketplace, and also ensuring that we could look at synergies across Global Fashion Group. I think at the time when all the transactions were done was operating across 32 markets globally, right? So there's huge opportunity there for scale.
I wonder, so I have a couple questions about starting Antler. I feel like, based off your track record, you obviously have already grew a company from scratch, but I feel like building a fund is kind of like a different game. And I wonder, when you first started Antler, how do you answer the question of why the world needs another fund and why you?
Well, so there were two things we were very excited about. One is the decentralization of innovation. So if you look at where great companies are being built today, they can be built out of anywhere, right? But if you go 30 years back in time, the concentration was very, very high in Silicon Valley. There were still great companies being built a lot of places in the world, but it was very, very concentrated around Silicon Valley. And over the last kind of 30 years, that has changed quite a bit, right? In the US, there are really exciting companies being built out of a lot of cities in the US. In the rest of the world, you have amazing companies being built out of big cities and small cities, and very successful ones, right? You can take on the biggest companies in the world, right? Look at Spotify out of Stockholm. You know, it's a million people there. They took on Apple in their core entertainment segment and won. And look at Canva out of Sydney taking on Adobe. Look at Atlassian taking on Microsoft and productivity software. Look at Southeast Asia as a region. You know, the biggest operators here in e-commerce and hyperlocal delivery, they are Shopee, Lazada, Grab Taxi, Gojek. They're not the big US companies. So that was kind of one thing I was very excited about. Hey, you know, there are incredible talent in all of these amazing places, an ecosystem that over the next 10 to 20 years is grow very fast. So if we can work on enabling them a little bit to be slightly more successful, that will have a very big impact on the world. And it's also a great return, a great way to deliver great returns. So that was kind of one. And the second reason was the excitement around working with founders from day zero, right? So, you know, I've always been very excited about new ideas, big problems. And I always believe that the only ones who will move the world forward are great people deciding to spend their time innovate and spend their time around solving those problems. And a lot of funds, even really early stage funds, even accelerators, typically tend to invest in companies that are at least kind of 6 months old, 1 year old. Most accelerators invest in companies that are on average kind of 1 to 1.5 years old. Seed funds come in at 1, 2 years, even 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it felt like a great opportunity to work with people from day zero, even prior to them incorporating the business, and really focus in on that core thing, which is the strength of the founder and the strength of the co-founder team, and that they're working on something that makes sense. So those were the two things that we got very, very excited about. And then we literally spent a ton of time talking to everyone in the world about, you know, how can we best deliver value around that opportunity. So we spent about 4 months iterating that idea before we launched 2nd of January 2018. And obviously since then we learned a lot, right? So I think what we're doing now is incredibly more advanced and incredibly more impactful to our founders than we were 6 years ago. But also some of our early portfolio companies are now becoming really, really big and have done incredibly well. So we must have done something right at the start as well. And, you know, returns are looking good. But more importantly, I think that we are starting to have a really big impact on a lot of ecosystems across the globe and have been a good partner to a lot of really great founders. And through that, hopefully we'll have a meaningful positive impact on things.
Totally. I wonder, so you mentioned about this in like another podcast that like you would set, let's say call it like a 10-year goal, and then maybe you like, and then what would you would need to do like in 1 year, what you would need to do in like every week or something. And I wonder for that, how do you set up goals for your fund? I have like many other questions, but I will stop there.
Yeah. So obviously, if you think about building tech companies and investing in tech companies, the jury is really out like 10 years later, right? You don't. It's very hard to know exactly how well a team will do even before they incorporated their company. But you need to have a goal in terms of where you want to be at that point in time. I think it's very important as a founder, but also an investor, to be able to be on the balcony and set audacious long-term goals in terms of quality and services and product and also what you want to achieve. And I always believe then in trying to set very long-term targets that are very, very ambitious and so ambitious typically that they're hard to reach, but because that's the only way you'll kind of drive I think, long-term excellence. And even if you achieve 80% of it, you end up then delivering incredibly well. But at the same time, it's insanely important to focus on what can you control right now, right? Because if you spend too much time on the balcony thinking about the future and all the amazing things that you're going to achieve and all the amazing companies, nothing gets done, right? So you also need to focus on, okay, what are you going to do in the next year to get closer to that 10-year? What are you going to do the next 3 months to get closer to where you want to be in a year? What are you going to do the next month to get closer to where you want to be 3 months from now? And what are you going to do this week to ensure that you get closer to where you want to be a month from now? And I think if you're able to, divide your time, and obviously you spend most of your time on what you're actually doing right now, but if you're able to kind of switch in between those two perspectives, you can drive the organization and your strategy in one direction and in the same direction, but at the same time, be very focused on delivering immediate impact, right? So, what we're focused on now is very clear. It's, we want to back the very best founders in the world, and we'll get more than 100,000 applicants this year from founders all across the globe. And unfortunately, we can't work with all of them, so we got to ensure that the ones that we select are truly, truly incredible. Then we need to be a good partner to them, so they get a lot of momentum off the bat, right? And make meaningful programs towards solving the problems that they're trying to address. And then, thirdly, we need to ensure that, they become long-term successful and they get to Series A, Series B, and Series C, right? So we focus a lot around kind of building those capabilities, which comes down to finding exceptional people. And then once we invested into these portfolio companies, we focus on building a great network of co-investors. So we like to partner with all the accelerators in the world and all the VCs in the world and family offices and high net individuals and super angels. We have built a very big talent network, so we can help our portfolio hire their first great people. And when they expand into new markets, their first person in that market. We focus a lot on competencies. So we built a strong advisory network of more than 600 operators across the globe that are deep within specific areas. Let's say you need to figure out your B2B SaaS pricing strategy. We'll have experts who can support with that. We've negotiated deals with all the major platforms across the globe to ensure that companies, as they start building, they can access services for free and get early access to the most advanced cloud platforms or AI models or legal services or whatever it might be. And then we focus a lot on the community, right? So basically, founders very often will learn the most and get the best advice from other founders that are building similar things, sometimes in the same market, sometimes in other markets. So we have now a community of thousands of founders where there are very great discussions on multiple topics that are helpful to them in terms of building their company. So that's what I really kind of mean when I talk about that is, yes, our very long-term goal is to be one of the leading players in the world in terms of supporting great founders and building great companies from scratch. And our mission is to make progress inevitable, which will only happen if great people choose to innovate and solve important problems. But you can talk a lot about that. But if you don't do anything about what you're doing the next week or the next month or the next 3 months, you will never get close, right? So that's how we think about things.
I wonder, so when it comes to like, for example, like so I guess like as a CEO and the managing partner of Antler, I guess you have like two part of your job, right? Like one part is to fundraise and like portfolio construction and like managing the fund itself, and then the other part is like sourcing, picking, winning, and liquidating like the best investments. So I wonder, number one is like, when it comes to when you are thinking about your strength, obviously one of it would be like connecting global founder and all that. I wonder, when you are building up the infrastructure, I guess like what do you identify as your unfair advantage, and how do you kind of like what does it look like from like a sourcing, picking, winning, liquidating perspective?
So our winning strategy is to find exceptional people and be a really good partner to them as they're just getting started, right? So we don't try to predict the future, right? So that I think there are many funds who rightfully are very deep within a specific sector, and they spend a lot of time thinking about how that future will look like, and they look for companies that are building within that space, and then kind of back the best ones. What we try to do is find the people who are building the future and not try to predict the future. And basically that's our winning edge, right? So we have now a very, very large pipeline of really amazing founders who want to work with us. And we select the top 1 to 2% of them, and we work with them for 3 months, typically, before we put in the first check. And then we are long-term partners with those founders, as we have the ability to invest up to Series C, so we can continue backing great founders in their seed round, in their A round, in their B round, and in their C round as they continue to grow. And we plan to hopefully be able to back them longer. And I think that combination of being incredibly focused, because in the early days, what really matters is the quality of the co-founder team and the momentum they're making towards solving an important problem. So just by focusing on that thing and trying to be amongst the best in the world on it, that's how we'll win. Now, how do you think about that in a fund perspective? Well, so the earlier you go in venture capital, the more risk there is. And even if I guess kind of last quarter, we invested in 0.5% of the opportunities that we looked at, is very highly selective and really incredible people. There's still risk, right? Even the best team in the world working on something that really makes sense can on occasion fail. So you need to build a larger portfolio of companies in those funds. We typically have about 100 to 150 companies in our funds, and that ensures that there's enough outliers in there to deliver top decile or top quartile returns. What is always true in any environment, even today, is incredible companies. You're always able to sell, if you want, your stake in an incredible company. So liquidation is important, obviously, because we need to return the money back to our investors. But I think that only really matters if you have incredible companies in the portfolio. So like we're spending 98% of our time on that particular problem, which is, okay, how do we get access to better and better people, and how can we be a really, really amazing partner to them as they're building their company?
So I guess like in terms of like building the infrastructure and like portfolio construction, so you mentioned like you would invest like from like the first track to maybe try to follow them to like Series C. And what would be the graduation rate from, let's say, like the first, like you mentioned like 250 companies. So like right now you guys already invest in like over 1,000 companies, and like I wonder when how many company would you invest like to Series C, like from the beginning to Series C? What would be like um I guess like a success rate that you are thinking about, like, that would be like a success for you look like?
It's hard to say, right? Because we're obviously still early on in the journey, and we only made our first investments in October 2018. And obviously we have scaled since then, so we're making more investments now than we did at that time. So the average age of the Antler portfolio is probably around two years old. So we'll see how that turns out. But we do expect that a pretty large share of the companies will return money back to the funds. Our belief is that if you're ultra focused on the quality of the co-founder team and they are working on something that makes sense, you remove a lot of the risk, right? If you look at the reasons for why startups fail, basically, the biggest reason is it wasn't the right team. The second reason is they're working on the wrong thing. The third reason is they couldn't raise capital. And then you go down the list and you realize all of them are related to like the team, right? Because the team chooses what to build and the team raises the capital and the team gets the customers and the team hires people and so on, right? So you remove a lot of the risk by being able to spend so much time with the founders, also work with them on iterating the business model before you put in capital. So we have an insanely high survival rate. And basically, we're seeing companies, the vast majority of companies raise capital after we invested quite quickly, right? For example, we made 8 investments in New York in January. 7 of them already raised subsequent capital by March 15th. And this is this year, right? Which is still not, the VC markets are not, back to the peak of 2021. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of fund through rate. We're seeing the companies doing really well, the course doing incredibly well. So who knows what that kind of total value will be, but we do assume a very large share of the companies will return money back to the fund. When that's said, in early stage investing and in venture capital in general, and the earlier you go, this matter more, is the amount of outliers, right? So, out of 100 portfolio companies or 150 portfolio companies in the fund, how many of them will be billion-dollar plus companies or $500 million plus companies or whatever metric you put in there? And that matters way, way more than whether 80% or 50% of your portfolio delivers value back to the fund. So we're very, very focused on being a very strong supporter to all of our portfolio companies in the beginning. And over time, obviously, you will concentrate more and more time on the companies that are really progressing and creating an immense amount of momentum. And we'd love to kind of back all of these companies all the way to Series C. And sometimes we are wrong and we won't back them in the subsequent round, and somebody else does, and they end up doing incredibly well, and then we can come in later. But if we could with back all of them, we tend to kind of back more and more of our portfolio companies in the subsequent round as our access to capital increases, and we want to be a really long-term partner to as many of our great companies as we can. And then it's obviously also down to the founder, right? Like the founder really needs to create momentum. Otherwise, there's no Series A that we can take part in, because we don't lead subsequent rounds. We tend to kind of introduce our portfolio companies to other great VCs. We really like to partner VCs and not compete against other VCs. Like where we want to compete is about finding the very, very best founders, and then at seed, Series A, B, C, and so on, we co-invest with other Tier 1 VCs all across the globe, or corporates, family offices, and high-net individuals, and so on. So that also means that most of the ecosystem look at us as a partner, right? We become a deal for originator, but we're not only someone who hands you a deal, but we're someone who want to co-invest with you in that deal going forward. So I think a lot of VCs look at us as partners, accelerators look at us as partners, but also the founder, since we're kind of there and backing them from pre-day zero, I think a lot of founders also look at us as an extension of their co-founder team. And I think all of that in the end is what's going to deliver outsized return. Is if the best founders in the world think you will be a good partner to them, and after you have been a partner to them, can attest to that, that's how you systematically will win in this space.
I wonder, so like when you are, I want to quickly say hi to the audience. Hi, Lufano. Hi, Eman. Okay, so I want to go back to what you said about like, being a great partner to founders. Like when you were filtering out the founders, since you are receiving over 100K deals, and like you guys pick like more rigorously than like a lot of like the top school. And I wonder, how do you benchmark like I guess like what would be the question that you would ask founders to evaluate their team strength? Obviously, like, you know, people are looking for like smart people who are tenacious, but like, I guess like what would be something specific that you would ask the founder to kind of filter out the quality that you want from like a founding team?
Yeah, great question. So I think there are two aspects to that question. One is, first you need to assess the individual, and then you need to assess the team. So one thing we spend a lot of time on, obviously, ensuring that the people we work with are exceptional. And we are really looking for three things. We're looking for a spike, so something that individual is better at than most other people, right? So, you know, great. So I don't know your entire background, but you're definitely like really great at talking to people, and you can really connect with a lot of people all across the globe. And that's a spike, right? And other people might have as a spike that they are insanely deep on a scientific method to design new protein chains, right? Whatever it might be, we want to identify something this person is better at than most other people. We think founders are quite spiky in general. They're not great at everything, but they're exceptional at something, and then they might have some deep weaknesses, but we care less about those. We really care about that spike. And if you look at a lot of the most famous founders in the world, they are kind of quirky individuals to a way, right? Like, so they do have many of them have very, very deep weaknesses, but they have something in them that is just truly, truly exceptional. So that's kind of the one thing, the first thing. The second thing we look at in an individual is a drive. And I think drive very often can be misconstrued or confused with passion. So there's a lot of really passionate people out there that are incredible, great people, but they never get anything done, right? So they're like, you know, I think all of us have friends, and even myself, like I'm passionate about stuff I talk about all the time, but I never do anything with, right? So you know, passion in itself doesn't really work. You know, we all have friends who've kind of talked about specific thing for 20 years and never do anything about it. So drive for us is, sure, passion is important, but drive for us is being very, very ambitious combined with having shown the ability to execute, right? So can we see signs in their experience of having been able to execute on things, and are they truly ambitious? Founders are typically pretty ambitious. Successful founders are typically pretty ambitious. And then the third thing we look for is grit. So is this a person that will really give everything to succeed, right? Will they, when they hit that wall and everything is super dark and their company is almost going bankrupt, as almost any founder in the world has experienced who have been very successful, at some point of time their company was really struggling, like Airbnb for 3 years, Tesla went bankrupt always 8 times. You know, you can talk about any great business in the world, and they've gone through these types of experiences. Then you need founders who don't quit, right? That don't give up. And you know, there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience, but they've kind of jumped from one thing to another. And when the going gets tough, they don't want to do it anymore, and they want to try something new. And it's very dangerous to give your investors money to founders like that, because most likely things gets very tough when you back them, they're going to stop, and then you need to find someone else. So, you know, those are the three things we look for: a spike, drive, and grit. So that's how we assess the individual. Then when you have a collection of really great individuals like this, and you want to test whether this is a great co-founder team, you know, the most important thing, and I think great founders are really great at making that assessment, but we help them with a set of tools to do so. The first thing I think that is important is that you meet enough really incredible people like that. You need to meet, you should meet like 40 to 50 people who has a clear spike, a ton of drive and grit, right? So that you don't just choose the first person available to you, because it's an insanely important decision. So like, be in the environment around a lot of people like that. And obviously in Antler, we've selected a lot of people like that. And typically there's a cohort of about 50 to 100 of people like that. Or you can also access our cohorts globally, where there will be, you know, if you look at across 27 locations, there will be more than 1,000 people like that. So you can leverage the Antler network, but you can also leverage your own network and get to meet a lot of people that you think have that spike driving grit. So that's number one, I think, is you want to build a funnel. Then the second thing you want to do is then start working together with these people, right? Like start solving a problem, start working on your business model, and figure out whether you really enjoy working together, right? Like I think that's the most important. Like you enjoy working together, you share a common set of values, there's a level of respect there. That's kind of level one you want to see in the team, right? It's like it's a good unit. Level two then is if you have that, it's advantageous that there are different spikes in the team. So there's some diversity in strength or diversity of experience. And that obviously will make you stronger. Like if I'm incredible at operations or hiring incredible people or building a vision, having a co-founder that is incredible at building a product or going deep into analytics or whatever it might be the company needs, it's beneficial versus everyone having the same spike. So that's kind of level two. And then you could go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And we really kind of advise our founders and ask the co-founder teams like how deep they've gone, right? Like because basically if co-founder teams can break up for all the weirdest of reasons, right? So it's like, sometimes people haven't discussed who's going to be the CEO, and 2 years into building the company, they still haven't decided, or somebody got the CEO title, but the other person actually wants to be it, or they haven't sorted out the equity split, or sometimes it's benign stuff as perhaps one of the co-founders has children and the other one doesn't, and then they haven't talked about how that's going to affect how they work, right? Like if you have small kids, you got to be with them in the morning, you got to put them to bed, you can work in between that, you got to go on vacation now and then with the kids. You can't work 365 days a week, a year, 20 hours a day, which you can when you don't have small kids, or perhaps your parents are sick or whatever it might be. Like, so we really recommend people to go, like, you start at that really high level, right? Which is, all right, do you really enjoy working together? Then do you have different spikes? And then you go deeper, 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 deeper. And you try to figure out whether this is an incredible person to spend the next 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years solving an incredibly important problem with. And really, for most founders, this is the most important thing they'll do apart from family, right? In their lifetime. So we really encourage people to kind of go deep on that, and these are the type of questions we'll ask a co-founder team. And so, first you need to ensure the individuals are great, and then you got to ensure that the dynamics in the team is great. If you have that in place, I think you remove kind of 80% of the risk in early stage investing. Then it's about, will this be a small company or a really, really, really big company, right? It's you're removing a lot of the 0 to 1 risk through that process.
I wonder, so like when you were talking about, for example, the co-founder dynamics, I've only heard about like two kind of story. One is, let's say, the co-founders were like friends for like many, many years, or like they have worked together in the past, like I guess like a billion companies. And then there's another set of people that they just met. And obviously like either one have like been working historically, like, for example, let's say call it like the Dropbox co-founding team, or like just people making up on the spot. But there's also like some other team, like the Stripe founders, or like brothers, like literally like actual brothers. So like you've seen like people who know each other very well and then work with each other very well. On the other hand, there's like people who just met and then they both like built it successful companies. And I wonder, how do you, like, what would be the question that you ask them to find out if they are suitable for each other? And like there's no, like, people would say amazing things in like the interviews. So I wonder, like, how do you kind of like quickly evaluate if they could like make it as a team?
So we literally go through that funnel I spoke about earlier. So first we talk about like how is it working together. We just ask about some of the stuff they recently done and how it's been working together as a team. Then you obviously start assessing different strengths, and then you start asking questions around how you discussed this, have you done that, Brian, etc. Right? So you really, in the same way as we think a founder should assess a co-founder, we assess the co-founder team, right? So I think that's the best way to go about it. Now, this is not directly to your question, but I thought it's kind of interesting anyway, so I'm going to share it. So there's this really interesting research being done, who's been done recently on online dating, right? So online dating is a pretty new concept. So it's only really existed, I guess, since I don't really know, but like since I guess like 1999, 2000, 2001 or something. And so you now have 25 years worth of data on people meeting each other online and choosing a wife or a husband. And apparently it's very successful. Like, apparently it works incredibly well. And apparently on average it works better than people meeting each other organically. And researchers have been asking each other, like, so why is that the case, right? Like, isn't there a bigger chance that if you meet someone who got introduced by a friend or happened to be your network or you grew up with or whatever, will be a better match? Well, you would think so, right? Logically. Mm-hmm. But then you start thinking about the way people approach building these relationships, right? So, if people are kind of meeting online, they will go into that first meeting with a set of questions they want to get answered. If they're serious about it, right? If they're just meeting to have fun, then it's different. But like, if they're serious about finding a life soul or a life mate, they go in with a set of expectations and a set of questions. And then they ask the questions first, and then they fall in love later. Instead of falling in love first and then asking the hard questions later, which might be too late. And I think, sometimes with founders who've known each other for a very long period of time, that could be very advantageous because you've been through a lot of things together, right? But sometimes you haven't actually been through a lot together. You just happen to live in the same room as in college, or you happen to be brothers or sisters, or you happen to work together for a couple of years in a company. But building a business is just completely different from that environment. So sometimes I think knowing each other for a long period of time, if you've been through a set of experiences that are tough and you test this person and you've gone through the same set of kind of discovery as you would if you meet someone for the first time, then it can be very advantageous. But sometimes it's not, right? So like, I think as a founder, I think it's important to try, whether you fall in love first or fall in love after, you gotta ask the questions, right? And don't just pick the one who is the first and best person you can see, but try to meet like 40 or 50 really incredible people that has a spike, drive, and grit, and then spend some time figuring out who's this one or two or three people that you're going to build your company with, because it's insanely important. Like, co-founder breakup or not having the right co-founder team is the number one reason why companies fail.
I wonder, so when it comes to like, having like working with other investors, how do you, for example, let's say, would it be like an afterthought, or would it be like, you would intentionally like build a network of like tier one investors, like doing, follow on for Antler founders? How do you kind of like create the ecosystem and brand as a fund?
Yeah, we very, very actively want to work with other VCs and accelerators and high-net individuals, super angels, family offices, and we try to figure out kind of what they're really great at and also what they're looking for, and where they can be very supportive to the founder. And then we try to make kind of warm introductions to companies as they're raising their seed, Series A, B, and C, to the right investor at the right time. So we're not wasting people's time, but at the same time, we can bring on board really great people on the cap table of these portfolio companies, because I think the investors you get on board as a founder is insanely important. Now, in the end, by far the most important is the team and what they're building. They're building the company, but a great investor can be very, very helpful. And that's also why we think we've been able to work with so many great people, because the people we worked with in the past are appreciating the effort and what we're contributing and doing for them. So we try to build those networks and very carefully make introductions to the right people at the right time. And a lot of VCs and accelerators and super angels and family offices, they come and spend time in our office. They do office hour of our portfolio companies. We really, really don't think of anyone in the ecosystem as a competitor. And the other great thing about venture capital innovation, I think, is it's not like one cake out there that needs to be divided, right? It's all about kind of building a bigger cake, right? Like the potential is infinite, right? So and we all stand on the shoulders of giants before us, and we're all, if everyone supports each other and helps really, really amazing people solve important problems, then the value creation will 10x versus what it was over the last decade, right? So we very much have that approach to things, and that I think has served us very well. And more importantly, it's very, very important for the founders, because I think if you're just backed by one platform all the way, then that can also be somewhat dangerous, because you give too much control to one investor, and on top of that, you don't get to leverage a multitude of platforms and people that can share their experiences and be supportive to your growth and momentum.
I wonder, so like for example, like you mentioned like this year you guys invested in like 8 company, and then 7 like in New York, like 8 company, and then like 7 company had already raised like follow-ons. And I wonder, like, would you like for example, like finding these like future round investors like first before putting an investment to the companies? Or would you, I guess, like what would be the way that you would kind of like evaluate if something would get like full-on investment based at like some of the core characteristics? Would Is there any kind of like pipeline or like kind of like infrastructure that you've built to like make sure that like the portfolio company is like well funded?
Yes, from an investment perspective decision, it doesn't factor in at all. The investment decision is based on the co-founder team being exceptional and then working on something that really, really makes sense. Now, what sometimes happens is some of these teams just get an insane amount of momentum really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone wants to invest in them, right? So it kind of takes care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes a bit of time to build that momentum, right? I mentioned Airbnb earlier. I think it took them 2.5 to 3 years to really create any type of momentum. And I know Y Combinator was incredibly helpful to them in terms of introducing to Sequoia and getting a small check on board from Sequoia. And, they were very supportive during that journey. And sometimes that is very important, right? Like, perhaps the next round is done a year later or 2 years later, and you introduce the founder to 30 or 40 or 50 or sometimes 60 investors, and a lot of them say no, but at least you try to introduce them to the investors that you think would be very interested in this specific business at the time in which they actually can invest, so you're not wasting anyone's time. And in the end, someone will say yes, right? And sometimes those are the companies that end up doing incredibly well. So doing that is very important, and we're typically very systematic about it. And we built a database where we have all those relationships, and we track all of our meetings with the investors, and we learn more and more about them and build stronger and stronger relationships. And we even now applied an AI model to it, as that is becoming quite powerful in terms of a network of I think we have more than 3,000 relationships in that database now. So figuring out which of those 3,000 one should introduce to the portfolio company at a very specific period, very specific time. So that is very, very important. And then also just ensuring that we can be supportive in, particularly for those companies where it take a little bit more time to get there. And because sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, they will be the successes. Like I spoke about Airbnb earlier. I think Spotify is another great example. Our CIO, KCR Group, his fund, I think, were the first investors into Spotify. And I think Spotify talked to, I don't know exact number, but they talked to almost every single European VC and a number of US VCs and so on in the early days. And a lot of people said no before Northzone and a few other people came in with that first bit of capital, which is understandable, right? Because it was obviously two Swedish guys who were trying to take on Apple with an unproven technology in a market which is controlled by an oligarchy, right? The music industry is pretty tough to get into. So sometimes that support is very important, and sometimes it's not. And whether it's important or not depends on doesn't necessarily depend on whether the company 5 to 10 years later will be one of the best companies in the world that have made the world a much better place. It might just be due to how long time it takes to create that initial momentum.
I wonder in terms of like, I want to be mindful of time. So I will have like one real question and then we have like a 1 minute fire round for you.
Okay.
So you're building a team globally. Like, how do you recruit the best talent globally? And how do you manage, like, since like you guys have like over 30 locations, like how do you kind of like manage such a big team?
Yeah, so we're partnerships. If you look at the people running Antler in various locations across the globe, most of them have an even more impressive background than me, and they are typically people who built really great companies there, or were part of building a really great company, or they've invested into really great companies. So our Rajiv, who runs India, built Urban Ladder that sold to Reliance. Alan Punskin is a part of running the team in Central Europe, built West Wing, which is one of the most successful companies out of there. And you kind of can go through the list, and it's just it's very clear that there's very, very high talent density of people who build great things, who will be a great partner to founders. And if anything, the vast majority of them are more impressive than me. Now, how do you create that in a company? The only way to do that is to be a partnership and not build a very hierarchical structure, right? And I think in a business where people is so important as ours, that is the right structure. And with that comes a lot of amazing opportunities for learning, which is, right now we're working with founders in 27 locations in parallel, right? If we're doing mistakes one place, we can learn from them and not repeat them other places. If we do something which leads to immediately better results in one location, we can adapt that and improve the entire model. And then we build a technology stack on top of that, which really has 3 roles. One is creating productivity for our partners, but the other is creating network effects, like I talked about, the investors, talent network, founder community, advisory network, and so on. And the third thing is data, right? Like, there's a tremendous opportunity now to learn from data. We had hundreds of thousands of applications. We have to learn portfolio companies. We pulled all the data from other available databases out there and are trying to learn about how we can do things better. So that's how we're structured up. And as a founder, that's incredible, because I think the better that structure is, the less important you become, right? So I think my importance was probably rather important in the early days, and now I still work very hard, and I'm trying to do everything I can to be impactful to the business, but quite frankly, is less important, and I become less important every day, because I think we put together an amazing group of people and in a good structure.
Amazing. Okay, so we have a 1 minute fire round for you. First question: what's your favorite book?
Favorite book? Well, this wasn't really a fire, but I really liked I remember reading this Steve Jobs book that now I can't remember the name of the author, but just after he died, and it was incredibly inspirational. It's a great book.
The Walt Isaacson book, I think. Maybe I don't.
About Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I really here's another one that I really enjoyed actually, which which I really recommend to everyone, is A Man's Search for Meaning. It's incredible.
Who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to building a fund?
Personal board of advisors. My grandmother.
How does she impact your day to day though?
Doreen Grimeland. She always held me in the air, told me when I could do things better, corrected my grammar, and made me, I think, a better person, building the right values. But at the same time, she handed me a lot of books and articles and gave me a lot of inspiration to dream and think about things and think about the world at an early age. And I think she would be a great advisor to any fund or company. Unfortunately, she passed away during COVID at 19. She was just a month away from being 100 years old.
Wow, that's so sweet and thoughtful. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would love to invite Nelson Mandela. I remember reading his book when I grew up, and he was also a patron to my high school, but I never got to meet him myself. And I think the resilience you build after being treated that way for such a long period of time and coming out there and just wanting to do your best and bringing people together is just incredible.
Where can we find you outside of work?
With my kids or working out, I really like the outdoors. I do the occasional Ironman competition, love sports, and really enjoy spending time with the kids. That's the most fulfilling thing in life.
Amazing. That's so true. Magnus, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Grace. Really great questions, and thanks a lot for having me.
Let me quickly